Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Muse Fanfiction, presenting to you today, what if Eren Jaeger's attack titan spirit awakened inside Harry after the Dursleys' worst betrayal? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Cupboard Breaks. The summer Harry Potter turned 10 was the hottest in 15 years. That was what the radio said, anyway. Harry had heard it through the kitchen floorboards on the third day, lying flat on his stomach with his cheek pressed against the wood because the concrete floor of the cupboard under the stairs had stopped feeling cool somewhere around midnight. The voice on the radio had sounded almost cheerful about it. Record temperatures, folks, stay hydrated, keep an eye on the elderly and vulnerable, and Harry had thought, with the particular black humor of a child who has had to develop it early, that nobody on the radio was keeping an eye on him. Day 1 had been bad. Day 2 had been worse. By day 3, the thirst was the thing. Not the hunger. Harry had been hungry before, had learned to exist in the background noise of an empty stomach the way you learn to exist with a bad tooth, acknowledging it and moving past it. But the thirst was different. It had a voice. It sat behind his eyes and pushed. He didn't know what he'd done wrong this time. That was the part he kept turning over in the dark, because there was nothing else to do. He'd been careful. He'd been so careful that summer, quieter than usual, smaller than usual, doing every chore before Uncle Vernon could think to ask for it. He'd weeded the garden until his fingers bled. He'd washed every dish until they reflected like mirrors. He'd said yes sir and no sir and thank you without being prompted, and he'd thought, he'd actually let himself think, that maybe this summer would be different. Then Dudley had broken his own remote-controlled helicopter, the expensive one, the one Aunt Petunia had bought 3 weeks before Christmas and kept in a glass cabinet, and when Dudley pointed at Harry and said he did it, Uncle Vernon had believed him without blinking. Harry hadn't even been in the same room. The lock on the cupboard door had clicked from the outside, and that was that. He'd heard them leave for their holiday on the second day. The car. The suitcases bumping down the front step. Aunt Petunia's voice, bright and carrying, Marge is going to absolutely adore the Costa, Vernon, you'll see. Then the engine, and then nothing. Then heat. He had a bucket for necessity. He had nothing for thirst. By day 4 he'd stopped trying to measure time. There was light through the crack under the door and then there wasn't and then there was again, and Harry lay in the small darkness and tried not to think about water. He thought about other things instead, the shape of clouds, the names of stars he'd read about in a library book once, the way his scar prickled sometimes for no reason, like a compass needle swinging towards something it couldn't name. He thought about the dream he kept having, the one he'd never told anyone. In the dream, he was someone else. Not completely, he was still Harry, still aware of himself as Harry, but he was also standing somewhere vast and burning, wearing straps and leather and something mechanical on his back, looking out over a world that was ending. Not the quiet, cruel ending of a boy dying of thirst in a cupboard under stairs. A real ending. An ending with fire and scale and something like music underneath it, low and terrible and certain. In the dream, he always knew exactly what was happening. He knew why the world was burning. He knew whose choice it was. He always woke up with tears on his face and an emotion he didn't have a name for, not sadness, not fear, not even grief, exactly. Something older than all of those. Something that had made its peace. On the 5th day, Harry Potter stopped being afraid. It wasn't a decision. He didn't choose it. It happened the way hunger eventually stops screaming and settles into something quieter and more fundamental, a simple, structural fact about the world. He lay in the dark and felt the fear drain out of him the way water drains from a cracked container, and what was left behind was something harder and stranger. He thought, I might die in here. And then, immediately after, as clearly as if someone had spoken it aloud in the small space beside him, no. You won't. Harry turned his head. There was no one there. But the voice, not quite a voice, more like a memory of words, the way you sometimes wake up knowing exactly what someone in a dream said even though you couldn't hear it at the time, the voice said, you're not dying in a cupboard. Not you. Not like this. Who's there? Harry said. His own voice came out cracked and strange from disuse, barely above a whisper. Nothing answered. But something shifted, somewhere in the space behind his breastbone, somewhere that wasn't quite his body and wasn't quite outside it, something that had been pressed very tight for a very long time moved. Turned over. Breathed. And Harry felt it. It wasn't painful, exactly. It was more like having been numb in your hands for so long that you'd forgotten they existed, and then suddenly feeling them again. Pins and needles, but not in his hands. In something deeper. In something he didn't have a word for but that felt, unmistakably, like him, more him, in some ways, than the small careful boy who'd spent 5 years learning to take up as little space as possible. He pressed his palm flat against his sternum. His heart was beating. He noticed it the way you notice something remarkable. Oh, he thought, there it is, and then noticed that it was beating faster than it should, and then noticed, with a detachment that was almost academic, that his hands were shaking. You're stronger than this place, the not voice said. You always were. You just forgot. I didn't forget, Harry whispered. I never knew. Same thing. He sat up. It took longer than it should have, and the cupboard spun in a way that was definitely dehydration and probably something else too, something bright and disorienting that had nothing to do with his body. He put his back against the wall, the one with the pencil marks where he'd measured his height every birthday, the one with the single drawing of an owl he'd done when he was 6 and Aunt Petunia hadn't noticed in time to scrub it off, and he breathed. The thing behind his sternum settled. Not gone, it would never be gone, he understood that already with a certainty he couldn't explain, but quiet. Patient. Like something that had been running for a very long time and had finally, for just a moment, found solid ground to stand on. Harry looked at the door. He'd looked at that door hundreds of times. He knew every scratch in its surface, every variation in the grain of the cheap wood, the specific way the light leaked under it depending on the time of day. He'd looked at it with dread and with resignation and once, when he was very small, with the desperate hoping against hope of a child who still believes that if you want something badly enough the universe will eventually cooperate. He looked at it now and felt something entirely new. He felt like he was deciding. He reached out and knocked on it, 3 times, with his knuckles. Not frantically, not desperately, just 3 clear knocks, evenly spaced, like someone with somewhere to be. Nothing happened. The house was empty. Harry nodded, as if confirming something he'd already known. He turned sideways in the small space, brought his knees up against his chest, set the soles of both feet flat against the door, and pushed. He wasn't strong, he was 10 years old and hadn't eaten in 5 days and he knew objectively that he didn't have the mass for this. But something happened that had nothing to do with mass or with the practical physics of a locked door. The thing behind his sternum surged, not violently, not in a way that broke anything visible, and the door simply came off its hinges. Not the lock. The hinges. Both of them, popping loose from the frame with a sound like a knuckle cracking, and then Harry was falling sideways into the hallway in a wash of comparative brightness, landing on the carpet, blinking. He lay there for a moment. Then he got up, walked to the kitchen, turned on the tap, and drank. He drank for a long time, crouched over the sink with both hands gripping the counter, and when he was finished he stood upright and looked out the kitchen window at the garden he'd weeded and the grass he'd trimmed and the roses Aunt Petunia was very proud of, and he thought, something has changed. Not in the garden. In him. He made himself toast, 4 slices, methodical, eating each one completely before starting the next, and then he went upstairs, into the bathroom that he was technically only allowed to use at specified times, and ran a bath that was the exact temperature he wanted. He lay in it until the water cooled. He thought about the dream. He thought about the voice. He thought about hinges that had no reason to fail and did anyway. He was still thinking about it when he heard, from downstairs, a knock at the front door that shook the whole house. Harry came down the stairs still damp from the bath, wearing Dudley's old cast-off clothes that were 4 sizes too large, and opened the front door without hesitating. The man outside was enormous in a way that redefined the word. Not fat, enormous, like something that had been built to a different scale and had just decided to move through the normal world anyway. He had a wild black beard threaded through with gray and small black eyes that were surprisingly bright, and he was holding a pink umbrella that looked like it had been sourced from the lost and found of a very confused circus. He smelled of wood smoke and something earthy and clean, like forest floor after rain. He looked down at Harry. His expression did something complicated. "Harry Potter," he said. His voice was like a landslide, deep and warm and inevitable. "Last time I saw ya, were just a baby. Look at ya now." Harry looked up at him. "You knew my parents." It wasn't a question. The enormous man blinked, surprised, and then the complicated expression settled into something softer and more genuine. Yeah, I did. I'm Rubius Hagrid. Keeper of keys at Hogwarts." He paused. "Ya know about Hogwarts?" "I know. I've been waiting for someone to come," Harry said. "I didn't know who." Something about the way he said it, not the words themselves but the quality of them, the steadiness, the complete absence of the desperate eagerness or nervous trembling that Hagrid had been bracing himself for ever since Dumbledore had sent him on this errand, made Hagrid peer at him more carefully. He'd expected a skinny, frightened boy. He had that, mostly, the skinny part was undeniably true, and something about the oversized clothes and the faint shadows under the eyes made Hagrid's jaw tighten with a rage he kept carefully out of his face. But frightened? Not exactly. There was something in the 10-year-old looking back at him from the doorway that Hagrid had seen in some people and not others, and it had nothing to do with age or size. It was the look of someone who had recently made a decision about themselves and was at peace with it. "Can I come in?" Hagrid said. "The Dursleys aren't here," Harry said. He stepped back from the door. "I don't think they're coming back for 3 days. Come in if you want." Hagrid folded himself through the doorway with the practiced awkwardness of someone accustomed to buildings that weren't designed for him, settled onto the sofa, which protested audibly, and produced, from some inner pocket of his enormous coat, a slightly squashed box. "Brought ya a birthday cake," he said. "Bit late, happy birthday was yesterday, sorry 'bout that. Had some trouble tracking ya down." Harry took the box and opened it. Inside was a chocolate cake with green icing that read "Happy Birthday Harry" in slightly uneven letters. He looked at it for a long moment. "No one's ever made me a birthday cake before," he said. He said it the same way he'd said everything else, steadily, factually, without apparent self-pity. But something shifted in his expression, just briefly, just at the corners, a kind of wondering, the way you look at something you'd half convinced yourself wasn't real. Hagrid's eyes were bright and dangerous. "Well," he said roughly. "They're going to start, now." Harry looked up at him. "Tell me about Hogwarts." So Hagrid did. He talked for 2 hours, eating most of the cake and periodically dropping crumbs on the carpet without appearing to notice, and Harry sat across from him and listened. Not with the wide-eyed disbelief Hagrid had expected. Not with the feverish excitement either. He listened the way a general listens to a field report, noting, cataloging, occasionally asking short sharp questions that pulled Hagrid up mid-stride because they were exactly the right questions and Hagrid hadn't been ready for exactly the right questions from a 10-year-old who hadn't known magic was real 20 minutes ago. "Voldemort," Harry said at one point, while Hagrid was in the middle of the story of the night his parents died. "That's the name you won't say." Hagrid winced. "Don't say Voldemort," Harry said again, completely calmly. "It's a name. If I'm afraid of a name I'm behind before I've started." Hagrid stared at him. "Sorry," Harry said. "Go on." "My parents." Hagrid went on. Harry listened. When Hagrid described the house in Godric's Hollow, the ruins of it, the way Harry had been found in the rubble, the mark on his forehead, Harry reached up and touched his scar with 2 fingers, thoughtfully, the way you touch a compass. He put something in me, Harry said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. When he tried to kill me, some part of him ended up in me. Hagrid went very still. Now, how in blazes, how'd ya work that out? I didn't, Harry said. Not exactly. He lowered his hand. His eyes had that quality again, the faraway, not quite present look, like he was listening to something Hagrid couldn't hear. I've just had practice, I think, with the feeling of carrying something that isn't originally yours. Hagrid opened his mouth. Closed it. Made a mental note to report this conversation verbatim to Dumbledore and let the old man sort out what it meant. Right, Hagrid said. Well. We've got Hogwarts letters to deal with, and then there's Diagon Alley for your school supplies, and, he reached into his coat again and produced an envelope that had seen better days, with Harry's name written on it in green ink. Here's your letter. Harry took it. Read it. Folded it and put it in the pocket of Dudley's enormous jeans, where it sat looking absurd. When do we go? He said. That night, while Hagrid slept on the sofa, Hagrid had declared himself not comfortable leaving Harry alone in the house, which Harry had noted but not argued with because there was something about the enormous man's presence that felt, unexpectedly, like shelter. Harry lay on his cot in Dudley's room and did not sleep. He thought about the cupboard. About the 5 days. About the hinges. He thought about the dream. Then he stopped thinking and just listened, the way he'd been unconsciously practicing for years without knowing what he was listening for. You're wondering if I'm real, the Knot voice said. I'm wondering what you are, Harry said quietly, to the ceiling. Outside, Hagrid's snoring shook the walls in rhythmic waves. A pause. Then, I'm what's left of someone who wanted freedom badly enough to break the world trying to get it. I don't know what I am, in the terms you'd use. I'm a memory that became too heavy to die. Did you? Harry said. Break the world? Yes. No hesitation. No softening. Harry appreciated that. Are you sorry? The longest pause yet. Outside, a night bird called once and fell silent. I'm something. I'm not sure sorry is the right word. Sorry implies I'd undo it if I could. I don't know if I would. A beat. That's the honest answer. All right, Harry said. You're not scared of me. Should I be? Most people would be. I've been alone with something terrifying inside a small dark space for 5 days, Harry said. I don't have a lot of scared left for anything that can actually talk to me. A sound that wasn't quite a laugh, warmer than a laugh, more like the exhale after one. Yeah. You're going to be fine, Harry. I know, Harry said. And then, for the first time in 5 days, he slept, deeply and without dreams, like something in him had finally stood down from a watch it had been keeping for 10 years. Diagon Alley arrived the next morning in a cascade of impossible things, and Harry walked through each one with his eyes wide open. He'd decided, somewhere between the bath and the birthday cake, that he was done being surprised by his own life. Surprises implied expectations, and expectations were something you could only afford if you had evidence that the world intended to behave consistently. Harry had no such evidence. So instead of surprise, he had attention, sharp, focused, turned outward. The leaky cauldron smelled of beer and candle wax and something older underneath both, something he couldn't name but that felt like depth. The people in it turned when Hagrid walked in. Hagrid had a presence that made that inevitable, and then they saw Harry, saw the scar, and something passed through the room like a current. People came forward. Shook his hand. Pumped Hagrid's arm. Said his name like it was an answer to a question they'd been carrying. Harry shook hands and nodded and said nice to meet you and thank you and watched. He watched the way they looked at him, the relief in it, the wonder, the strange desperate hope that gets stored in symbols when the real thing isn't available. He understood something about that. Eren's memories, not fully formed yet, more like impressions, like knowing the shape of a room from the light that escapes under its door, had given him a context for being looked at that way. For being the thing that people pointed at when they needed to believe the nightmare was over. The problem with being someone's proof that the nightmare is over is that the nightmare generally isn't. He didn't say this. He shook hands, and he watched, and he filed things away. Gringotts was white marble and burnished gold and a hum that was either the ventilation or something older, something geological, something that made your back teeth itch. The goblins behind their high counters looked at everything with flat professional eyes that saw values and quantities and risk. Harry liked them immediately. He understood the goblins in a way he couldn't quite articulate. There was something in their bearing, their barely concealed contempt for the humans who thought their ownership of gold was the same as being owed deference, their private honor system that had nothing to do with the system imposed from outside. He watched the goblin teller count out his coins from the vault, his parents' vault, which felt strange and enormous and entirely separate from him, like inheriting someone's house and not being sure yet whether it's your home, and when the goblin pushed the pile across the counter, Harry said, "What's the exchange rate, if I wanted to convert some of this to pounds?" The goblin looked up. "Why would you want pounds?" "In case," Harry said. The goblin considered him for a moment with flat amber eyes. 17 galleons to the pound, approximately. It fluctuates. "Thank you," Harry said. The goblin's expression didn't change, but something in the set of its shoulders shifted, almost imperceptibly. It nodded once. Harry filed that away too. In his vault, while Hagrid waited at the door looking green from the cart ride, Harry stood in the cold underground air and looked at the stacks of gold coins and thought about what money actually was, not abstractly, not philosophically, but practically. What it meant to have it. What it had meant, before today, to not have it. He took what he needed for his school supplies, and then, on an impulse that felt more like Eren than like himself and that he followed anyway, he took extra. Not a fortune. Enough. He pocketed the coins and turned back to Hagrid, and didn't mention the extra. Madame Malkin's robes, a cauldron, scales and a telescope, the apothecary's explosion of dried things and powdered things and things that moved in their jars, Harry moved through all of it with the same quiet attention, collecting impressions, asking occasional questions, mostly listening. He'd found, since yesterday, that he processed things differently now. He'd always been observant, survival in the Dursleys' house had required it, but it had been defensive observation before, the observation of prey. Now it felt more like reconnaissance. He noticed exits. He noticed who deferred to whom. He noticed where the power was and where it only thought it was. Hagrid, who had been dreading this errand and half expected to spend the whole day managing a frightened, overwhelmed child, found himself instead slightly at sea, keeping up with Harry more than leading him, answering questions he hadn't anticipated. He'd mentioned this to Harry at one point, laughing a little, "Yeah, no, most kids ask me how long the train is. You asked me how the Hogwarts wards work. I want to know what I'm walking into," Harry had said simply. Hagrid had laughed again, but his eyes had been thoughtful. It was in Ollivanders that things got interesting. The shop was narrow and dusty and deeper than it should have been, and it smelled of cedar and lightning and something else, something animal and old and attentive. Mr. Ollivander emerged from the shadows with his pale eyes and his floating manner, and he looked at Harry the way the goblin had, really looked, beyond the scar and the expectations, and something flickered in his expression. "Harry Potter," he said, and his voice was like rustling pages. "I wondered when I'd see you." "Here I am," Harry said. Mr. Ollivander blinked. He had not expected that exact tone from an 11-year-old, that light, almost amused acknowledgement, as if he'd said, "I expected you'd come eventually," and Harry had simply confirmed the appointment. He recovered smoothly, produced the tape measure that began its work without being held, and began talking about wand woods and cores in the floating, absorbed way of a man who lives inside his subject. The measuring finished. The wands began. Harry tried 8 wands, and each one felt wrong in a way he couldn't describe, too eager, or too cold, or like wearing someone else's clothes, technically functional but subtly all wrong. He could feel something at the edge of each attempt that was almost right and then slid away. Mr. Ollivander was watching him with increasing interest. "Curious," he said, after the eighth. "Very curious. You feel it, don't you? Not just wrong, you're feeling for something specific." "I don't know what I'm feeling for," Harry said. "But I'd know it when I found it." "Yes," said Mr. Ollivander softly, and there was something almost reverent in his voice now. "That's how it always works." He disappeared into the shelves. Returned with a box that was dustier than the others, that he held with a different kind of care, the care you give something old and particular and not entirely predictable. "Holly and phoenix feather," he said. 11 inches. Supple. "I remember every wand I've ever sold, Mr. Potter, and I remember this one particularly. The phoenix that gave this feather gave only one other, and that wand did great and terrible things. I wonder what this one will be capable of." Harry took it. The effect was not the shower of sparks he'd been watching from the other attempts, the polite approving display of a wand saying yes, adequate, we can work with this. What happened was different. What happened started in his palm and moved up his arm and into his chest, and the thing behind his sternum that had woken up in the cupboard surged up to meet it like two currents of the same river finding each other, and the air in the shop moved, all of it at once, a single pulse outward from where Harry stood, and every box on every shelf shifted 6 inches to the left. Harry stood very still. His eyes were bright with something he didn't try to name. "Remarkable," Mr. Ollivander whispered. He was staring not at the displaced boxes but at Harry's face. "Truly, truly remarkable. How much is the wand?" Harry said. His voice was perfectly steady. 7 galleons. Mr. Ollivander was still staring. "Mr. Potter, are you quite all right?" "Yes," Harry said. He counted out the coins precisely and placed them on the counter. "Thank you, Mr. Ollivander. This is the right one." "Yes," Mr. Ollivander said, still soft, still watching. "Yes, I rather think it is." Outside, Hagrid let out a long breath he'd been holding since the shelves moved. "Right then," he said. "That was, yeah. That was something, Dot." Harry looked up at him. "What's the name of the wand that shares this core?" Hagrid's expression did something uncomfortable. "What do ya mean?" He said the phoenix gave only one other feather. "Whose wand is it?" Hagrid was quiet for a moment. Then, Voldemort's. Harry looked at his wand. Looked at his scar. Made a small, private sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. "Of course," he said. "Of course it is." He pocketed the wand and started walking, and Hagrid fell into step beside him, and neither of them said anything more about it for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, back at the empty Dursley house, Harry sat on the front step in the last of the day's light and held his wand across both palms and thought about cycles. 2 wands from the same phoenix. 2 boys pointed at each other across the same moment in history. He knew about cycles, Eren had known about cycles, had lived inside one and had made the choice to end it by burning everything, which was one kind of ending. Not the only kind. "He's afraid of death," the Not voice said, very quietly, like something being said from the bottom of a long drop. That's the whole of it, in the end. Everything he became, every horror, it was all running from that one thing. "I know," Harry said. "You're not afraid of it." Harry thought about this honestly. "I'm not looking for it," he said. "But no. Not particularly. That's going to matter. That's the thing that's going to matter most, when it comes down to it." "I know," Harry said again. The sun was orange and low. Somewhere down the street, a lawn mower ran and then stopped. The Dursleys' roses nodded in the last of the heat. Harry thought about the mirror he'd passed on the landing that morning, the one Aunt Petunia kept polished, and how he'd looked at himself in it and almost hadn't recognized what looked back. Same face. Same messy hair and 2 big clothes and lightning bolt scar. But the eyes were different. Not older, exactly. Just, present, in a way they hadn't been before. Like someone had come home to a building that had been vacant for a while. He thought about Hagrid saying "Yerry a wizard, Harry," and the way it had felt not like news but like confirmation. Like having the name for something you'd already known. He thought about Hogwarts. About the train, and the castle, and the 100 things waiting past that threshold. He thought about Voldemort, who was afraid of death and was somewhere in the dark gathering himself, pressing against the world's edges, waiting. Harry flexed his fingers around the wand. "You know what the difference is," said the not voice, "between someone who has to win and someone who just can't be stopped?" "Tell me," Harry said. "The one who has to win has already lost something they're trying to get back. The one who can't be stopped has already made peace with everything they've lost. They're not running toward anything. They're just moving forward." Harry let this settle. The last of the orange light slipped below the rooflines across the street. The air turned blue. "What did you lose?" Harry asked. A long silence. The night came in from the east, gradual and certain. "Everything," the not voice said. And then, softer, "and the worst part wasn't the losing. The worst part was that I chose it. And I'd choose it again. And I know what that makes me." "It makes you someone who understood what he was doing," Harry said. "That's not nothing." "No," said Eren Jaeger's memory, or his soul, or whatever fragment of a boy who burned the world and died with the sea at his back had found its way into this particular scar-headed 10-year-old in a too-big t-shirt on a front step in Surrey. "It's not nothing." The street lights came on, one by one, an orange chain down Privet Drive. Harry stood up. Brushed off his jeans. Put his wand in his pocket. In 3 days the Dursleys would come back to a front door that was off its hinges, a son who had eaten most of the refrigerator's contents, and a cupboard whose lock had never been opened but whose hinges had inexplicably failed. Vernon Dursley would go very red and begin shouting, and Harry would stand in the kitchen doorway and look at him with that new quality in his eyes, and Vernon Dursley would stop shouting. He wouldn't know why. He would only know that the thing looking out of the boy's eyes was not the thing he was used to looking out of the boy's eyes, and that some very old and very animal part of Vernon Dursley would understand, with no further explanation needed, that the former arrangement was over. They wouldn't bother him again. Not really. Not ever again. But that was 3 days away. Tonight, Harry went back inside, made himself dinner in the Dursleys' kitchen without asking anyone's permission, and sat at the table in the front room, not the kitchen, where he usually ate alone, but the front room, the one that was Dudley's and Aunt Petunia's and Uncle Vernon's, the one with the nice furniture, and ate his meal and read one of his new school books, and the house was quiet around him, and it was nothing, objectively. It was just a boy eating at a table, but for Harry Potter it was the first small act in a long sequence of reclamations that would eventually include much larger things. For now, the table was enough. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Remembered Dying. The letter from Hogwarts said term began on September 1st. Harry had 6 weeks. He used them. The Dursleys came back on the 3rd day exactly as Harry had predicted, Uncle Vernon red-faced from the Costa del Sol and already building toward a shout the way storm systems build, visible from a distance, inevitable. Aunt Petunia came through the door first and saw the front room furniture rearranged. Harry had moved it back almost exactly to how it had been, but almost was the operative word, and Petunia noticed, because Petunia always noticed deviations from the approved arrangement of her house, and said what on earth in a sharp, carrying voice that brought Vernon in from the front step where he was managing suitcases. Vernon saw the cupboard door first. The way it leaned against the wall beside its frame, both hinges clean off, the screws still in them, no sign of forcing or breaking. Just, off. Like the decision had been made by the door itself. Then he saw Harry, standing in the kitchen doorway. Harry didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He just stood there in the kitchen doorway in Dudley's old clothes with his arms loose at his sides, and he looked at Vernon Dursley with his new eyes, and Vernon Dursley stopped mid-breath. There was a moment, for 5 seconds, where the whole house held still. Dudley came in from the car dragging his overnight bag and walked into the back of his father, who had stopped moving. Petunia put one hand on the hallway wall. The refrigerator hummed. I've been accepted to a school, Harry said. A boarding school. I'll be gone from September 1st. I'll need school supplies before then and I have money to pay for them myself, so that won't be an issue. He paused. I'll need a ride to London on the 31st. Platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross. Vernon opened his mouth. Uncle Vernon, Harry said, pleasantly, I think this is going to work out well for everyone. Vernon closed his mouth. Aunt Petunia made a sound, high and controlled, the sound of someone pushing something down hard, and walked past Harry into the kitchen and began making tea with the focused energy of a person who has decided that the world will conform to normality through sheer domestic force. Dudley stared at Harry. Harry looked back at Dudley, not with the old flinching readiness for impact, but with the same easy steadiness he'd turned on his uncle, and Dudley, who had excellent instincts when he could be bothered to use them, picked up his overnight bag and went upstairs without saying a word. That was the whole of it. No shouting. No locked doors. The arrangement was revised. The following week, Vernon drove Harry to a branch of Barclays Bank in town, where Harry, with coins from his vault converted by Hagrid and deposited the previous afternoon, opened a current account in his own name and deposited enough money to cover his school supplies with room left over. He did this without explaining it to Vernon, who sat in the car outside and pretended to read the newspaper. Harry had read 3 of his school books by this point. He'd started with a history of magic because history told you where you were by showing you how you'd got there, and then the standard book of spells, grade 1, and then, because he was curious and they'd been in the pile, Quidditch through the ages in a single afternoon. He found the textbooks manageable, not easy, but the kind of not easy that was interesting rather than defeating, the kind that made you want the next page. The magic framework was learnable. It had internal logic. He liked things with internal logic. What he also did, in the evenings, was something he didn't have a formal name for yet. He sat on the floor of Dudley's room, his room, now, functionally, nobody argued about this, and he was quiet, and he let the memories come. They didn't come all at once. They came the way water comes through old stone, finding the cracks, seeping, building up gradually into something you can cup in your hands. He never forced them. He just stayed still and let whatever was in him surface at its own pace, and he looked at each thing that surfaced with the same clear attention he turned on everything. He saw a boy with dark hair and a long face, standing on top of a wall, looking at a world so vast it seemed to have no edges. He felt the boy's hunger, not for food, but for the thing beyond the wall, the thing that existed regardless of whether you were allowed to want it. He knew, with the bone certainty of borrowed experience, what it felt like to have been born into a cage so complete that other people couldn't see the bars from inside. He saw the same boy older, harder, different in the eyes, the hunger still there but with something else layered over it, a grim and total forward momentum, the look of someone who had stopped negotiating with the world about what he needed and started simply taking it. He saw, and these came harder, came with weight and smell and sound in a way the earlier ones didn't, a world moving. Thousands of enormous feet, ankle-deep in ocean, walking toward a continent. He felt the horror of it and the terrible relief of it in the same moment, the way you feel when something inevitable finally arrives and the waiting is over, and he understood, without needing to be told, that the person responsible for this was simultaneously the person whose memories he was watching and one of the worst things that had ever happened in that world. He sat with that for a long time. You don't have to look at all of it, the not voice said, on one of those evenings. I know, Harry said. I want to. Why? Harry thought about this. Because you're in me and I'm not going to pretend you're not. Whatever you did, whatever happened, it's part of what I'm carrying now. I'd rather know what it is. He paused. And because you understood something about freedom and about what it costs that I think I need to understand. Even the parts that, he stopped. Even the parts that should have been done differently. Yeah, Harry said. Even those. A silence. The night outside was warm and the window was open and London was a distant orange glow on the clouds to the east. You're more careful than I was, Eren said. More, you stop and look at things. I stopped doing that. I decided I knew what was coming and I stopped looking. What happened when you stopped looking? I stopped being right, Eren said. I was still moving forward. I was just, moving forward wrong. Harry turned this over in his mind the way he turned everything over, looking at its shape from multiple angles. I'll try to keep looking, he said. I know. That's why it had to be you. Harry almost asked what that meant. But then he decided he'd rather find out than be told, and let it go. The 31st of August arrived overcast and humid, the sky the color of old pewter, pressing down on the city like something that hadn't made up its mind. Harry was ready by 7 in the morning, trunk packed the night before, every book and robe and piece of equipment stowed with a neatness that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with the simple satisfaction of having things in order. He'd had Hedwig, his owl, the snowy white one Hagrid had bought him in Diagon Alley the day after the cupboard, who had immediately established herself as a creature of opinions and had spent the subsequent weeks expressing these opinions loudly about everything from the quality of her perch to the audacity of Dudley walking past her cage. He'd had Hedwig in her cage on top of the trunk since 6:30. She was not pleased about the cage. She communicated this. I know, Harry told her. It's temporary. She ruffled her feathers with the energy of someone who does not find that reassuring. Vernon drove them to King's Cross in the kind of silence that had become the new baseline of the Dursley household, not warm silence, not comfortable silence, but at least not the kind that preceded shouting. Harry watched London come and go out the car window and thought about platforms. 9 3/4. He had the logic of it from his books, magical concealment, spatial overlap, the way wizarding infrastructure existed in the gaps and margins of the mundane world. He understood the theory. He was less sure about the practice of running at a barrier. But then, the Not voice observed, you ran at a locked door with your feet and that worked out. Fair point, Harry thought back, and almost smiled. King's Cross was its usual organized chaos, school holiday traffic, pigeons, the smell of diesel and pastry from the shops near the entrance. Harry got his trolley and his trunk and his owl, thanked Vernon with perfect politeness, and walked into the station without looking back. He was fairly sure Vernon drove away before Harry was through the doors. He found Pillar 9. Found Pillar 10. Stood between them and watched the wall. A family went past, enormous family, red-haired, loud in a comfortable way of people who have never had to be quiet, and he watched the last few of them push their trolleys directly at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 and disappear through it, and the youngest boy, about Harry's age, caught his eye as he went past and said, "It's not as bad as it looks, just don't think about it too hard," and then was through the barrier, gone. Harry stood there for a moment. Don't think about it too hard. He considered this advice, decided it was probably correct, and walked at the barrier at a comfortable pace and was through it before he'd entirely decided to be. The Hogwarts Express was red and enormous and breathing steam into the damp August air like something alive, and the platform was an explosion of noise and color, trunks and owls and cats and pointed hats and parents saying last things and children saying enough already in the universal language of 11-year-olds who need their parents to go. Harry stood for a moment at the edge of it all and took it in. He felt Eren's response to it, faint but present, a warmth that had nothing triumphant in it. Just recognition. A departure, the Not voice said quietly. There's always something about departures. Harry found a compartment at the far end of the train, stowed his trunk, settled Hedwig's cage in the overhead rack, and sat down by the window and watched the platform. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just looking. The red-haired boy from outside appeared in the compartment doorway about 10 minutes later, looking hopeful and slightly rumpled, one of his shoelaces undone. Is it all right if everywhere else is full, he said. It's not full, Harry said, because the rest of the compartment was visibly and entirely empty, and he appreciated honesty. Yeah, all right, everywhere else has someone I know in it and my brothers are going to take the mickey all the way to Scotland if I have to sit with any of them. He dumped his trunk in the rack with the easy physicality of someone who does this constantly and dropped into the seat across from Harry. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Harry Potter. Ron stared at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, Really? Really? Huh. Ron looked at the scar, briefly, with visible effort at subtlety that didn't quite succeed, and then looked away. Sorry. Mum told me not to stare. It's fine, Harry said, and meant it. Ron settled back in his seat with the relief of someone who'd been braced for something difficult and found it wasn't. He dug in his bag and produced a parcel of sandwiches and a chocolate frog, considered Harry, and broke the frog in half with a pragmatism that Harry found immediately likable. He offered half across the compartment. Harry took it. What are the cards about? Ron lit up the way people do when you ask about the thing they genuinely care about. He explained famous witches and wizards cards with the depth and specificity of an expert, and Harry listened and asked questions about the ones who interested him, not the powerful ones necessarily, but the ones who had done something interesting, who had moved the world sideways by thinking about it differently. He noticed Ron noticed this. Noticed the mild surprise in Ron's face when Harry's questions weren't the ones he expected. You've read the books already, Ron said, after a while. It wasn't accusatory. More, curious. Most of the first-year ones, Harry said. My brothers never did that. Ron sounded almost awed. Fred and George, I mean. They got on the train and hoped for the best. How'd that work out for them? They're both still alive, Ron said. And Gryffindor, so Mum was happy. So, pretty well, I suppose. He paused. What house do you want to be in? Harry considered this honestly. He'd thought about it, in the way he thought about everything that was coming, practically, structurally. He'd looked at the 4 houses in a history of magic the way he'd look at 4 different tactical positions and tried to understand what each one was actually for, not what it said about itself. I'm not sure house really determines much, he said. It's more about the people in it, isn't it? Ron opened his mouth and then closed it, in the manner of someone who has opinions about this but recognizes they're looking at a more complex position than they'd expected. I mean, yeah. But Gryffindor is, my whole family's been Gryffindor. It matters. I know, Harry said. That's actually why it matters to you. Not because of what Gryffindor is. Because of what your family is. He paused. That's not a criticism. That's a good reason. Better than most. Ron looked at him. His expression was the one Harry would come to know very well, the squinting, slightly boggled look of someone recalibrating. You're a bit different to what I expected, Ron said. What did you expect? I don't know. The books all say, Ron stopped. We have books about you. That's weird, isn't it? I never thought about how weird that is. Very weird, Harry agreed. What do they say? Oh, brilliant wizard, defeated you-know-who, the boy who lived, all that. Ron waved a hand. They make you sound sort of shiny. Like a trophy. He seemed to realize this might not be the most diplomatic phrasing. Not that, no, that's accurate, Harry said. That's exactly right. He looked out the window, where the last of London was giving way to the greener edges of the countryside. I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed. I'm not, Ron said, quite simply, with no apparent agenda. You seem like an actual person. That's better than a trophy. Harry looked back at him. Something in his expression shifted, not much, but Ron was watching close enough to catch it. Something that was almost surprised and then wasn't quite surprised and then settled into something quieter and more permanent. Yeah, Harry said. Thanks, Ron. The compartment door opened and a bushy-haired girl leaned in with the focused energy of someone on a task. She looked at both of them with large, assessing eyes. Have you seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost his toad somewhere on the train. No toad in here, Ron said. I haven't seen one, Harry said, but there's a compartment 3 cars back where I heard something that might have been a toad. Near the luggage rack. The girl stared at him. You heard a toad from 3 cars back. I was paying attention, Harry said simply. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone filing information rapidly. I'm Hermione Granger, she said. Have you done the reading for first year? Most of it, Harry said. Which parts haven't you done? Astronomy, I read ahead instead of the first year material. And I'm partway through Magical Theory by Adalbert Waffling, but I haven't finished it yet. Hermione Granger looked at Harry Potter the way Harry looked at things that interested him, with her full attention, turned on completely. You read ahead in astronomy? The star charts in the first-year text reference things that are explained in the second-year material. I wanted to understand them properly. There was a beat. Ron was looking between them with the expression of someone watching a tennis match that has become more interesting than expected. I'll help you find the toad, Harry said, and stood up. Ron, come on. Ron came, with the ease of someone who has already decided, without making a formal decision about it, that he's going to follow this particular person wherever they go and find out what happens. Neville Longbottom was found 3 cars back, sitting on a trunk looking miserable, and his toad Trevor was located in approximately 40 seconds by Harry crouching in the aisle and listening with the same focused stillness he applied to everything. He held out his hand and Trevor hopped into it with the defeated air of a toad who has given up on escape as a viable strategy. Neville took the toad back with both hands and an expression of profound relief and gratitude. He was round-faced and soft and had the particular look of someone who had been told, or implied, that he wasn't quite enough, not quite brave enough, not quite clever enough, not quite anything enough times that he'd started to believe it. Harry knew that look. He likes it if you hold him up a bit, Harry said, and demonstrated with a cupped hand. Neville adjusted his hold, and Trevor relaxed, and Neville looked from the toad to Harry. How did you know that? Frogs and toads like to feel like they're on an elevation. It makes them feel safer. He paused. He'll be all right. He's not a runner, you're Trevor. He stops when he's confused, doesn't go far. Neville looked at the toad, then at Harry, with the beginning of an expression Harry suspected he'd be seeing more of, people measuring the space between what they'd expected and what they were getting. Are you, I know who you are. I don't mean to be rude. It's fine, Harry said. I'm Harry. Neville, right? Yeah. Neville seemed to be deciding something. The other Slytherins on the train, not that I know if you're going to be Slytherin, some of them were saying you were probably going to be in Slytherin because of Voldemort. The word fell into a small silence. Several people in the nearby compartments went still. Hermione drew a sharp breath. Ron winced. Harry said, they can say what they like. It doesn't change anything about what I actually am. Neville stared. You just said his name. Yes. Nobody says his name. That seems like exactly the problem, Harry said pleasantly. Come find us if Trevor runs off again. He turned and walked back toward their compartment, and Hermione fell into step beside him, and Ron on his other side, and behind them Neville stood in the corridor with his toad and a complicated expression that had something new in it, something that was the very beginning of a different idea about himself. The train arrived at Hogsmeade Station as darkness fell, proper darkness, northern darkness, the kind that came with the smell of pine and cold water and wood smoke from somewhere further up the hill. Harry stepped off the train and breathed it in and felt something move in him that had nothing to do with Eren and everything to do with being a child arriving at a place that would matter. The boats across the lake were Hagrid's domain, and seeing him on the shore was the first familiar thing Harry'd encountered since the train, and it settled something. Hagrid's enormous silhouette against the castle lights, calling out Fur's years this way, no more and 4 to a boat. Harry climbed into a boat with Ron and Hermione and Neville and didn't speak as they crossed the water. He looked at the castle. Hogwarts. It rose from the rock above the lake in a way that defied structural sense, towers that were too tall, windows that were too many, wings that extended in directions that didn't quite agree with the others, lit from within with a warm orange gold that had nothing to do with electricity. It was the most absurd building Harry had ever seen, and it was also, unmistakably, a fortress. He looked at the walls and the towers and the placement of the lights and mapped it the way Eren mapped things: entrances, sight lines, high ground, approaches from water. He noted that the castle was on a peninsula of rock with the lake on 3 sides and the forest on the 4th and one road in, and that from a defensive standpoint it was genuinely impressive, and then he noted that he was 11 and arriving at school and smiled at himself a little. "It's incredible," Hermione breathed, beside him. "Yeah," Harry said. And meant it differently than she did, and meant it just as much. "It's a wall," Eren said, very quietly. "But it's a good wall. Built by people who intended to protect something inside it." "I know," Harry thought back. "That's the difference." The sorting was a hat, which Harry had read about but which was still strange in practice, an old, patched, slightly battered hat that sat on a stool at the front of the hall and proceeded to sing a song about the 4 houses with more theatrical commitment than Harry had expected from any hat. The great hall was doing its best to impress, enchanted ceiling doing the stormy night sky, thousands of candles, long tables full of students who were all watching the line of first years with the particular attention of an audience that has seen this show before and is waiting for the interesting bits. Harry was toward the middle of the alphabet. He stood in line and watched each student go forward and sit on the stool and wear the hat and be named to a house, and he watched the reactions of each table, and he watched his future classmates resolve out of the anonymous line into individuals, this one nervous, that one too casual to be genuine, the one near the back who kept looking at his hands, the girl near the front who whispered something to herself like a rehearsal. Draco Malfoy had come over on the train, that had been another compartment entirely, Malfoy sliding in with his 2 enormous friends and saying Harry Potter with the practiced precision of someone who'd been rehearsing, offering his hand with the loaded friendliness of a political gesture. Harry had looked at him and seen, very clearly, a boy who had been carefully taught to see the world in terms of alliances and leverage, and who was currently trying to establish both in a single handshake. Harry had shaken the hand. Had not committed to anything Malfoy actually wanted. Now he watched Malfoy go forward and sit on the stool, and the hat barely touched his head before it shouted Slytherin, and Malfoy strode to the Slytherin table with the satisfaction of someone ticking a box, and Harry watched and thought, he's been told he's important in a specific and limited way and he believes it completely, and it's going to be the thing that holds him back. Potter, Harry. The hall went different. Not quiet, it had been quiet, but different, the quality of the attention shifting, sharpening. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and settled the hat on his own head. Darkness. The smell of dust and something else, something almost alive. "Well," said a voice that was the hat but also somehow not just the hat, dry and curious and very, very old. "I haven't had one like you in quite some time." "What do you mean?" Harry asked. He thought in the direction of the voice the way he'd learned to direct his thoughts inward at Eren. "There are 2 of you in here," the hat said. Not alarmed. Interested. Or, not 2, exactly. 1.5. Something that was more than 1, compressed. Like a book shelved inside another book. A pause. "The boy in the back is very angry." "He's not angry now," Harry said. "He used to be." "What is he now?" "Careful," Harry said. "He's careful now." The hat made a considering sound, like pages turning. "You have the courage of Gryffindor and the mind of Ravenclaw and something else entirely that doesn't quite fit any of the 4. You want to know where I'd put you?" "Yes." "Where do you want to go?" "I want to go where I can do the most good," Harry said. "That's not an evasion." "I mean it." "I know you do." The hat sounded almost amused. "That's actually the most Gryffindor thing you've said." "All right, then. Gryffindor." The red and gold table erupted. Harry removed the hat, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between professional assessment and personal appraisal, and walked to the Gryffindor table to a noise that was half welcome and half something reverential that Harry did not particularly enjoy. He sat next to Ron, who had been sorted a few minutes before and was clapping with the uncomplicated pleasure of someone whose hopes have come true. Harry sat down and nodded at the students nearest to him, who nodded back with expressions that ranged from excited to starstruck, to one freckled girl further down the table who just looked quietly pleased, as if she'd bet on something and won. He looked up at the staff table. Found Dumbledore at its center, old, silver-bearded, half-moon glasses, the weight of someone who has been carrying something enormous for a very long time and has made the carrying look elegant. Dumbledore was looking at Harry. When their eyes met, something moved in Dumbledore's expression: surprise, quickly managed, professional, smoothed down, but there underneath. He had been expecting one thing and was looking at another. Harry held his gaze for a moment, not challengingly, just steadily, and then looked away. Next to Dumbledore, the Defense Against Dark Arts teacher, Quirrell, the one Hagrid had mentioned, the one with the stammer and the turban, who was supposed to be brilliant once and had come back from a year abroad a different person, was looking at his plate. And Harry felt at the moment he looked in Quirrell's direction, the moment his attention crossed that space. It was like the scar, but different. Not pain. More like recognition. The feeling of two incompatible things being in proximity to each other, each aware of the other, each waiting. Harry looked at Quirrell's turban and thought about what could make a turban necessary in a warm Scottish castle. There, said Eren, very quietly, in the back of Harry's mind. That's where the danger is. I know, Harry thought. I've known for 30 seconds. What do you want to do about it? Harry reached for a plate of roast potatoes and put 3 on his plate. Watch, he thought. For now. Just watch. He ate his dinner and talked to Ron about Quidditch teams, and kept Quirinus Quirrell in his peripheral vision for the entire meal, and not once did he look away long enough to miss anything. Later that night, in the Gryffindor dormitory, Harry lay awake in the dark after the others had gone to sleep, Ron making sounds like a very relaxed walrus, Neville curled around his toad, the other 2 boys he hadn't properly met yet breathing steadily in their beds, and he stared at the canopy of his 4-poster bed and thought. He thought about the year ahead. About Quirrell and what lived inside the turban. About the stone, he'd inferred it from Hagrid's careful non-answer on Diagon Alley, the thing Hagrid had collected from Vault 713 on Dumbledore's orders, the thing that was now presumably somewhere in the castle, guarded by something. About Voldemort, who was not dead and was not free and was looking for a way to be both. He thought about Dumbledore looking at him and seeing something unexpected. He thought about the hat saying there are 2 of you in here. You never told me your name, Harry thought, into the dark. I mean, I know what it is. But you never said it to me. A warmth, at the back of his mind. Something that was not quite sadness and not quite anything else. Eren, said the not voice. My name was Eren. Eren, Harry said quietly, to the dark of his canopy. Testing the weight of it. It was a short word, 2 syllables, but it had mass, the mass of things that had mattered enormously to people who were gone. Yeah. I'm glad you're here, Harry said. A long pause. Long enough that Harry thought he might have pushed at something too tender and backed off. But then, me too, Harry. Me too. Outside the tower window, the Scottish hills were dark and vast, and the stars were doing what stars do, burning at impossible distances, moving so slowly the motion wasn't visible, maintaining their patterns whether anyone was watching or not. Harry closed his eyes. He thought of the boats coming across the black water toward the lit castle. He thought of the sense he'd had, arriving, that whatever he'd come here to do was waiting for him patiently, the way a fact waits, the way the sea waits, neither threatening nor gentle, just there, exactly as large as it is. He could feel the year ahead. Could feel it the way you can feel weather coming, a change in pressure, a quality of anticipation in the air. Are you afraid? Eren asked. Harry thought about the question honestly. He took it seriously, the way he tried to take everything seriously. No, he said. I'm ready. And he was asleep before the word finished falling into the dark, and his dreams that night were of stars and of running, not from anything, not toward anything specific, just the clean animal pleasure of moving fast across open ground with the wind coming in from somewhere new, the kind of running that is just freedom with better shoes. Chapter 3, Walls Within Walls. The first week of Hogwarts moved fast, the way new things always do when you're paying attention to all of them at once. Harry paid attention to all of them at once. He paid attention to the way the staircases moved, not randomly, he decided by Wednesday, but according to a logic that was just complex enough that most people gave up trying to understand it and started navigating by landmarks instead. He mapped the pattern in his head. By Friday he could predict 3 out of 4 staircase movements with enough accuracy to plan his routes. The fourth one, the grand staircase's eastern branch, remained stubborn, and he noted it and kept watching. He paid attention to the teachers. McGonagall was precise and demanding and fair in the way that only people with genuine standards are fair. Her approval meant something because she didn't hand it out to fill silence. Flitwick was genuinely excited about magic in a way that made the subject feel like something worth being excited about. Sprout had the particular calm of someone whose primary relationship was with things that grew slowly and who extended that patience to people as a natural extension. Snape was the most interesting of all of them, which was not the same as the most pleasant. Potions was in the dungeons, which were cold even in September and smelled of copper and earth and something preserved longer than comfort allowed. Snape arrived the way weather arrived, not loudly but completely, filling the room from the moment he entered, robes moving with the deliberate weight of someone who had thought carefully about how movement conveyed authority. He had a face trained to stillness and eyes that hadn't learned the same discipline, black and fast and cataloging everything. He called the register with ceremonial flatness and reached Harry's name with a pause that ran 1 beat too long. "Ah yes," Snape said. "Harry Potter. Our new celebrity." The class arranged itself around this the way classes always did when a teacher established a social architecture in the first 30 seconds. Malfoy at his front table let himself a small visible smile. Several Gryffindors shifted. Ron, beside Harry, went very still with the particular stillness of someone who has been in enough of his brother's detentions to recognize the opening of a specific kind of trouble. Harry looked at Snape. Snape looked at Harry. The pause stretched 1 beat further. "Bezoar," Harry said. "A stone from the stomach of a goat. Counteracts most poisons. You were about to ask." I read ahead. A silence that had real texture to it. Snape's expression stayed exactly where it was. But something in his eyes recalibrated, a tiny refocusing, a lens adjusting for an unexpected distance. He looked at Harry the way Harry looked at things that turned out to be more layered than expected. Then he looked back at his register. 10 points from Gryffindor, Snape said. For speaking without being asked. "That's fair," Harry said. Ron made a sound beside him like something being quietly strangled. Hermione, 2 seats back, was staring at Harry with an expression that was roughly equal parts horror and fascination. Snape's jaw moved once, as if he was deciding something, and then he continued the lesson. Harry answered the questions he knew and said I don't know on the 2 he didn't, clearly and without apology. Snape neither praised him nor deducted further points, and by the end of the lesson a baseline had been established between them, not warmth, not exactly hostility, but a kind of mutual acknowledgement that the other one was worth paying attention to. Harry noted the layers under Snape's visible dislike and filed them carefully. There was history there, and grief adjacent to history, and something that looked at Harry and saw someone else, which was its own kind of interesting. Quirrell was a different problem entirely. Defense against the dark arts met twice a week. Quirrell's classroom smelled powerfully of garlic, not fresh garlic but garlic as a decision, garlic as architecture, layered into the walls and the furniture and the air itself. The stammer was consistent and the nervousness was consistent and the teaching was genuinely poor, wandering and incomplete, sentences abandoned midway. Harry sat in the front row and paid 2 kinds of attention simultaneously. The first was to the actual content, which he took notes on methodically because poor teaching didn't make the material less important. The second was to Quirrell himself, the micro-expressions, the way his hands moved when certain topics came up, the particular direction his eyes tracked when he thought he was unobserved, and most importantly, the quality of what Harry felt sitting in this specific room versus any other room in the castle. On the second Tuesday of term, Quirrell was explaining shield charms when his eyes crossed Harry's, and in that fraction of a second something happened that was fast and cold and specific. Not in Harry's scar, which prickled but didn't flare. In the thing behind his sternum, which went absolutely still the way an animal goes still when it has identified something dangerous, the stillness of assessment, not fear. The thing beneath Quirrell's turban recognized what lived in Harry just as clearly as Harry recognized it. Harry wrote down the wand movement for Protego and turned his page and said nothing. Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor afterward with the practiced naturalness of someone who had decided a thing and was simply executing it. She'd been doing this increasingly, appearing at his shoulder between classes, extending conversations that had started in lessons into the spaces between them. Harry didn't mind. He found her useful in the way that genuinely intelligent people were useful, not because they told you things you couldn't find yourself, but because they asked the questions that forced you to articulate what you'd only half formed. "You felt something in there," she said. "Not a question. What makes you say that? You went very still about 40 minutes in. You do that when you're processing something important. You stop making notes for exactly 45 seconds and then you start again." She paused. "I've been watching." Harry looked at her sideways. "I know you have." She didn't look embarrassed. "You're interesting. Most people aren't." "Quirrell is unwell," Harry said. "In some specific way. I don't know the exact mechanism yet." Hermione absorbed this. "His teaching has been getting worse since the first week. I thought initially it was just nerves. He's supposed to have been quite brilliant before he went traveling, but it's not anxiety, is it? It's something else." "Interference," Harry said. Hermione looked at him sharply. "What do you mean, interference?" "I mean that whatever he is now is competing with whatever he was, and the original Quirrell is losing that competition." Harry paused. "I don't think he has a lot of time left." Hermione was quiet for a moment, working through implications. The corridor moved around them, students flooding between classes, someone's cauldron leaking something orange from their bag, Peeves making noise one floor above in a manner that suggested imminent property damage. "Should we tell someone?" "Not yet," Harry said. "I don't know enough yet. Telling someone too early just moves the problem somewhere I can't see it." He glanced at her. "Don't repeat this to anyone. Not even Ron." "Ron could, not yet," Harry said again. Not harshly. Just with the particular steadiness that meant the point wasn't open for debate. "When I know more, I'll tell you both everything. Right now all we'd be doing is speculating, and I don't want Ron spending his first term watching Quirrell instead of enjoying himself." Hermione looked like she had several counterarguments queued. She picked none of them. "Fine," she said. "But I want to know when you know more." "You will," Harry said. "You usually know before I finish the sentence anyway." She didn't smile exactly, but something in her face shifted toward it. "That's not wrong," she said. The first flying lesson arrived on a Thursday, grey-skied and cool, the ground smelling of cut grass and coming rain. Madame Hooch assembled the first-year Gryffindors and Slytherins on the lawn with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times and had learned exactly how many 11-year-olds to trust unsupervised near brooms, which was none of them. Harry had never been on a broom. He'd read about it. Quidditch through the ages had actual descriptions of technique, and he'd absorbed them with the focused interest he gave to anything that involved moving through space at speed, which was something Eren's memories had given him a particular feeling for. ODM gear crossed 300 feet of open air in 2 seconds when you used the cables right. Broom flight was slower but more complex, requiring continuous adjustment rather than the burst and redirect pattern of the gear, and he was curious about the difference in the actual muscle memory of it. When Madame Hooch said hold your hand over your broom and say up, Harry's broom was in his hand before the word was fully out, snapping up with a sharpness that made her pause mid-demonstration. "Good," she said, looking at him briefly. "Good. Now, everyone." Neville's broom rolled. Ron's came up reluctantly and slightly sideways. Hermione's took 4 attempts and an expression of sheer determined will that was its own minor spectacle. Madame Hooch moved through the group correcting grips and stances, and Harry held his broom and thought about what it was he was actually holding, a length of wood with a specific magical architecture built into it, designed to interact with his intention through the medium of the grip and the weight distribution of his body. He thought about how you indicated a direction without a steering wheel. About how altitude was controlled. He ran through the physical logic of it the way he ran through everything, building the model from first principles, and by the time Madame Hooch said mount your brooms he had a reasonable working theory. He mounted. Saturday. Felt the broom's response to his weight, alive, that was the word, it was faintly alive under him, responsive in a way that no mechanical thing would be, aware of him. It knows you're there, Eren noted, with what felt like quiet interest. The sensation was familiar to him in a sideways way. The ODM gear had its own responsiveness, its own relationship with the body of its user, the way a good weapon knows the hand that holds it. Harry leaned forward slightly, experimentally, keeping his feet off the ground. The broom shifted, a live adjustment, anticipating rather than merely responding. Oh, Harry thought. Oh, I see. Madame Hooch gave the command to kick off, rise a few feet, hover, and come back down. Neville went up too fast in a burst of panic and kept going, his face white, the broom climbing with the indiscriminate enthusiasm of a thing responding to unregulated fear. Several people shouted. Madame Hooch was already moving but she was on the ground and Neville was 20 feet up and climbing. Harry was in the air before the thought completed. He didn't decide to go, he simply went, the broom responding to his intention with a precision that had nothing to do with being a beginner and everything to do with the fact that he was treating the broom not as a thing to control but as a partner to communicate with. He went up in a clean vertical, matched Neville's altitude in 3 seconds, pulled alongside the panicking boy, reached out and got a hand around Neville's broom and said, firmly, down. Both brooms descended. Neville's grip broke at about 6 feet and he fell the rest of the way, landing in the grass with a thud and a yelp, and Harry landed neatly beside him a half-second later and hopped off. He crouched next to Neville. Are you all right? Neville was clutching his wrist. His face was doing something between relief and pain. I think I've hurt my wrist, Harry said. He could see it, the angle was wrong. Don't move it. Madame Hooch, I saw, Madame Hooch said sharply, landing and kneeling beside Neville. She examined the wrist with professional care and then looked up at Harry with an expression that had several things in it. That was quick thinking, Potter. He was scared, Harry said simply. The broom responds to fear. He needed someone next to him who wasn't scared. How did you? She stopped. She looked at his broom, then at him. Have you flown before? First time, Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment with the particular expression of someone revising their plans in real time. Right, she said. Take Neville to the hospital wing, please. I'll have a conversation with Professor McGonagall. Her tone indicated the nature of that conversation. Harry helped Neville up, tucked the injured wrist carefully, and walked him back toward the castle. Behind them, the class was erupting in a dozen conversations at once. From the Slytherin side, he heard Malfoy's voice, not the sneering performance voice, but something more genuine underneath it, the sound of someone who has witnessed something they weren't prepared for and haven't decided how to process it yet. Did he just, yeah, said someone beside Malfoy. He did. The Nimbus 2000 arrived at breakfast 2 days later, wrapped in brown paper, delivered by 7 owls who seemed collectively unimpressed by the weight distribution of their cargo. McGonagall's note was brief and characteristically dry, permission has been granted by the headmaster. Report to Oliver Wood after breakfast for training. Don't be late. Ron stared at the broomstick emerging from the packaging with an expression of naked longing that was almost painful to look at. That's a Nimbus 2000, he said. Harry. That is an actual Nimbus 2000. I can read, Harry said. They cost, Ron stopped. Started again. You're going to be brilliant at Quidditch. I'm going to be useful at Quidditch, Harry said, which was a different thing, and which made Ron squint at him for a moment before deciding it was probably a compliment. Oliver Wood was a third year with the focused intensity of someone who had organized his entire inner life around a single sport. He met Harry on the pitch with the Nimbus already in his hands. Harry had brought it, and immediately launched into the rules, the strategy, the specific role of the seeker within the larger system of the team, and what he expected from Harry in terms of practice hours and commitment and flying time. Harry let him finish. Then he said, "Can I go up first? I want to feel the broom at height before we talk tactics." Wood blinked. Then nodded. Harry went up. He went up at an angle because vertical climbing was fast, but it gave you nothing useful in terms of environmental information, and leveled off at about 200 feet, which was the height that gave him the best combination of overview and detail. The ground spread below him, the castle, the lake, the forest, the Quidditch pitches, 6 golden hoops standing in their pairs like punctuation marks. The wind at 200 feet was different from the wind at ground level, moving in its own patterns, and Harry felt the broom adjusting to it constantly, and he adjusted back, and the communication between them became very quickly something he couldn't describe in purely mechanical terms. He flew the perimeter of the pitch in a long clean arc at full speed, because you needed to know what full speed actually meant on a given broom before you could make decisions about it. The Nimbus 2000 was fast, genuinely, properly fast, in a way that clarified all the ODM gear comparisons and made them irrelevant because this was its own thing entirely, a responsiveness that was less about force and trajectory and more about intention, the broom moving with a kind of intelligent anticipation that met him where he was going rather than where he'd been. He came back and dropped, sharply, 30 feet in a dive that he pulled out of at 12 feet off the ground with 6 inches to spare, and landed. Wood was staring at him. "Where did you learn to fly?" he demanded. "Just now," Harry said. "Show me how the snitch moves." October settled over the castle with the particular commitment of a Scottish autumn, which meant rain and wind and the specific pleasure of warm fires against cold stone. The common room in the evenings had a rhythm Harry liked, homework and chess and the slow development of relationships that were still finding their shapes. He and Ron had settled into an easy friendship that didn't require maintenance, the kind that existed between people who had simply decided on each other and were getting on with it. Hermione was a more active presence, constantly engaged, constantly thinking, the friendship with her more like a running conversation that had started on the train and hadn't paused. He recognized, being watched by more people than just his friends. The school watched Harry Potter the way it had always intended to watch Harry Potter, with the particular intensity of a community that had assigned him a symbolic role before he'd arrived to complicate it. But the watching had a different quality now than he suspected anyone had expected. They'd anticipated something more legible, the modest hero, the boy made humble by his own legend, or alternatively the arrogant golden boy drunk on his own celebrity. What they were getting was neither, and the gap between expectation and reality produced a kind of confused fascination in the student body that Harry found faintly amusing and mostly ignored. He didn't perform. He didn't manage impressions. He did what needed doing and said what needed saying and moved through the school with the directional certainty of someone who had already decided where they were going, and the school arranged itself around this the way water arranges itself around a rock. The one exception, the one relationship that didn't quite resolve itself into a legible pattern, was Malfoy. Draco Malfoy had expected something specific from Harry Potter and was not getting it, and this appeared to produce in him a frustration that occasionally boiled over into the traditional remedies, pointed comments, contrived situations, the standard grammar of school bully interaction. But Harry refused to speak the language. He didn't rise to provocations. He didn't perform the role of wounded rival. He responded to Malfoy's maneuvers with the same detached attention he applied to staircases, noting the pattern, understanding the motivation, declining to participate. This made Malfoy, Harry suspected, significantly angrier than a fight would have. In late October, it came to a head in a corridor outside Charms. Malfoy had made a comment about Hermione, one of the nastier ones, the kind that used a word like a thrown stone, and Harry had stepped around the corner into the conversation without quite planning to, and the two groups had arranged themselves in the corridor in the instinctive geometry of a confrontation. Malfoy looked at Harry with his pale, composed face and his family's particular brand of confidence, which was the confidence of someone who had never had to consider that the rules of the game might not apply to him. "Something to say, Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. He considered Malfoy the way he considered everything, straight on, without performance. "You're intelligent. I've seen it. You're actually quite good at Charms, and you asked Flitwick a genuinely interesting question last Tuesday about the relationship between wand movement and intent. But you've spent most of this term being boring." He paused. "The insults, the strutting about, the Crabbe and Goyle show, it's boring, Malfoy. You're better than it and you're choosing not to be, and I find that frustrating on your behalf." Silence in the corridor. Malfoy stared at him. He had prepared for several versions of this confrontation. This was not among them. What? "I'm not your enemy," Harry said. "I'm not interested in being your enemy. I've got more important things to do." He glanced at Crabbe and Goyle, then back to Malfoy. "But if you keep using that word about Hermione, I'm going to become very inconvenient for you, and not in the way you're probably imagining." He said this pleasantly, informatively, the way you'd give someone a weather report. "Something to think about." He walked past Malfoy and into the Charms corridor, and Ron and Hermione followed, and behind them Malfoy stood in the hallway with his mouth not quite closed, in the particular posture of someone whose internal architecture has just been interfered with. "That was either very clever or very mad," Ron said, under his breath. "Probably both," Harry said. Hermione said nothing, but she looked at Harry with the expression she got when she was reassessing something she thought she'd already figured out. She did this periodically, and Harry had come to understand it as a compliment of the most sincere kind. She didn't reassess things she'd already stopped caring about. The thing behind Harry's sternum had been building towards something for 3 weeks. He'd felt it the way you feel weather building, a gradual increase in pressure, a quality of accumulation. Eren's memories came more clearly now, more organized, less like impressions and more like actual scenes, not intruding, not painful, but present. A door had opened somewhere in his first week and hadn't closed, and through it came the layered history of a boy who had carried a power he hadn't chosen and used it in ways he'd chosen entirely, and the emotional weight of that history was enormous, and Harry carried it the way he carried everything else, by looking at it directly. The dreams shifted in mid-October. Instead of fragments, the wall, the boots, the burning sky, he began dreaming with narrative. He dreamed in long sequences, as if watching someone else's memories play out in order, and the someone else was recognizably young, recognizably angry in the clean, uncomplicated way of early adolescence, recognizably trying to understand a world that had showed him its worst face first. He watched a boy in a town called Shiganshina with a mother and a father and a friend with dark cropped hair who looked at him the way people looked at things they were afraid of losing. He watched the wall fall. He woke from that one with his hands fisted in his sheets and his heart rate high, and lay there in the dark dormitory breathing deliberately until it leveled, and Ron was asleep across the room and Neville was asleep and the castle was quiet around him. "Are you all right?" Eren asked. "I'm watching you grow up," Harry said quietly, to the dark. "I know. How old were you when the wall came down?" 9, Eren said. "Same as you were, when your wall came down. More or less." Harry thought about this. About the Dursleys' house and the cupboard, and the moment the hinges came off the door, and the moment everything before that had made possible, all the years of smallness and silence and learning not to want things, and how that education had somehow, in some essential way, made him ready for the thing that woke up in him in the dark. "Different walls," Harry said. "Same feeling inside them," Eren said. "That's the thing. The material doesn't matter. The feeling on the inside is the same." Harry sat up in his bed and looked out the tower window where the sky was doing the specific black and silver of a Scottish autumn night. He'd been thinking about this, about the parallel between the walls in Eren's world and the structures in his own. Not walls of stone. Walls of expectation, of assigned role, of what you were permitted to want and who you were permitted to be. Hogwarts was genuinely different from the Dursleys' house. It was vast and strange and mostly wonderful, but it had its own architecture of assumption and his place within it had been assigned before he arrived, and he could feel the shape of the cage even if the cage was gilded. He wasn't angry about it. He just saw it. "That's better than I managed," Eren said. "I got angry. The anger wasn't wrong, what I was angry about was real, but I let it do my thinking for me." "I know," Harry said. "I've seen it. In the dreams. And..." A pause. "What do you think?" Harry considered this honestly. Outside the window, something flew past, an owl, heading west, purposeful. "I think you got something very right and something very wrong in the same moment, and I think that's the most human thing I've ever heard of," he said. "I think you understood freedom better than almost anyone and you paid a price for it that I don't know how to measure." He paused. "I think you'd have done it differently if you'd known how." "Would I?" "You would now," Harry said. "That's what I think. The you that's here, now, you would." A very long silence. The wind outside moved against the glass. Somewhere below, the lake made a sound. "Yeah," Eren said, very quietly. "Yeah, maybe." Halloween arrived with Flitwick levitating real pumpkins in charms and the Great Hall transformed into its annual tribute to theatrical excess, orange lanterns and floating candles and the smell of something sweet and something smoky competing pleasantly in the air. Harry ate well and talked and watched the room, which was doing what a room full of children and a celebration does, getting louder and more itself as the evening progressed, everything turning up a notch. He felt Quirrell before he heard him. The door flew open, which was theater, the kind of entrance that required a running start. Quirrell burst through it with his turban askew and his face performing a terror that Harry watched carefully because the terror was real but it had a source that wasn't the words coming out of his mouth. "Troll," Quirrell gasped, catching himself on the doorframe. "In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." And then, with remarkable timing, he fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice cut through it, "Everyone to their dormitories, prefects lead, stay together," and the tables began emptying with the organized chaos of children trying to follow contradictory instructions in a loud space. Harry stood up and stayed still while the current of movement went past him, which meant Ron was 3 steps toward the door before he realized Harry hadn't moved. "Harry, Hermione," Harry said. Ron blinked. "What?" "She doesn't know about the troll." Harry was already moving against the current of students heading upstairs, not urgently, just with direction. "She's been in the bathroom all afternoon. She's upset about something Finnegan said in charms." "How do you know she's upset? She wasn't at dinner and her eyes were red in potions this morning." Harry moved through the dispersing crowd. "Come on. If there's actually a troll loose, if..." Ron said, now following, because that was what he did. Quirrell said, Harry agreed, which was not the same as confirmation, but this wasn't the moment to explain the whole architecture of his suspicions about Quirrell, so he moved through the corridor with Ron at his heels and found the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor and knocked twice. "Hermione. There's a troll in the building somewhere. You need to come out." A pause. Then her voice, carefully controlled but with something rough underneath it, "I know about the troll." "You don't know where it is," Harry said. A longer pause. "How do you know can we discuss this on the other side of the door? Please." The lock clicked. Hermione came out with her chin up and her eyes red in the specific way of someone who has been crying and is pretending very hard that they haven't. She looked at Harry, then at Ron, then apparently decided the troll was a more manageable immediate problem than the emotional one. They heard it before they saw it, a sound like wet furniture being knocked around, coming from the bathroom down the hall. Harry went toward it, naturally, the way he moved toward most things, and Hermione made a sound of protest and Ron made a sound that was cousin to a whimper but followed anyway. The troll was enormous in the way things that don't care about the scale of a room are enormous. It filled the space without meaning to, a mountain of gray-green skin and ponderous muscle, wielding a club the size of a tree trunk in a way that was less controlled aggression and more just the consequences of its own size. It had knocked every sink off the wall. The floor was wet and broken. Harry stood in the doorway and assessed. The troll's eyes were small and had the peculiar emptiness of something operating entirely from instinct, no strategy, no awareness of anything beyond immediate stimulus. Its hearing appeared to be its primary sense. It had turned toward the sound of them entering, not toward their position. The ceiling was too low for it to use the club effectively above shoulder height. The door they'd come through opened outward. Harry turned to Ron. "Make a noise on the other side of the room. Just noise, doesn't matter what. Keep moving." Ron stared at him. "You want me to, you're fast," Harry said. "Faster than it. 3 seconds, then get behind it. Go." Ron went, because Harry said it with the simple assurance of someone who had already worked out the exits, and Ron was brave in the uncomplicated way of someone who didn't waste time being frightened when there was something useful to do. He skidded around the edge of the room, knocked a piece of broken pipe against the wall, shouted something incoherent, and the troll turned its massive head. Harry had his wand out. He looked at the troll's ear, specifically at the angle of entry, and said Wingardium Leviosa with the precise wand movement Flitwick had spent 3 sessions on, and the troll's own club lifted out of its hand and rose to the ceiling. The troll looked up. "Hermione," Harry said. "Door." Hermione opened the door. Harry let the club fall. It came down on the troll's head with a sound like a cathedral bell struck sideways, and the troll sat down very suddenly, and then lay down, and then stopped moving. Dust rose from the bathroom floor. The 3 of them stood in the settling silence. Outside, distantly, the sounds of the school managing its own emergency. In here, the dripping of a broken pipe and the breathing of 3 11-year-olds and the very large unconscious thing on the floor. "Is it dead?" Ron said. "No," Harry said. "Just very confused." He lowered his wand. Looked at the troll. "Someone let it in." "It could have wandered in from," Hermione started. "There are 17 points where the castle wards interface with external ground-level access," Harry said. 12 of them are too small for a mountain troll to fit through. The other 5 are monitored. This thing didn't wander in." He looked at them both. "Someone opened a door for it. Deliberately." Ron and Hermione looked at each other. Then at Harry. "You think it was a distraction," Hermione said slowly. "I think the timing of Quirrell's announcement is interesting," Harry said, very carefully, because this was the edge of what he was ready to say aloud. "I think Halloween is a significant date for certain people. And I think whatever's being guarded on the 3rd floor corridor is something someone very specifically wants." The bathroom door opened. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell arrived at approximately the same moment, took in the scene, 3 11-year-olds, unconscious troll, broken bathroom, and the expressions that followed were genuinely complex. McGonagall's horror was real. Snape's expression was unreadable in the usual way but with something running under it that was faster than his normal calculation, something that had been running fast all evening. Quirrell looked at the troll and then at Harry, and the 2-second eye contact that followed was the most honest thing Quirrell had produced since September. Harry watched him look. Noted the frustration under the performance. Filed it. He apologized to McGonagall for leaving the dormitory, genuinely, because she was right to be upset about that, and accepted the 5-point deduction for each of them without argument. He saw her consideration of whether to add points back for the outcome, and watched her decide against it because giving points for violating safety rules created bad precedent regardless of outcome, and he respected this sufficiently to say so. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. "Potter," she said. "How did you know she was in the bathroom?" I was paying attention, Harry said. She looked at him for a moment longer, this precise small woman whose professional exterior had exactly one door in it, and that door was opened by exactly the right kind of directness. Something shifted behind her eyes. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said. For Miss Granger. For good thinking under pressure. She looked at Hermione as she said it. Hermione stood slightly straighter. They filed out of the bathroom. In the corridor, Ron exhaled very slowly and then started laughing, not the hysterical variety, but the genuine article, the helpless post-adrenaline variety, and Hermione, who had been holding everything carefully in place, laughed too with the surprised quality of someone who didn't know they had it in them. Harry looked at them both and felt something warm and uncomplicated settle in his chest. They walked up to the common room, the three of them, with the specific ease of people who have shared something dangerous and come through it together and now know something permanent about each other. Good, Eren said, very quietly, from the back of Harry's mind. Harry thought about his mother, who had friends once, and his father, who had friends once, and the friends who had stood around a map in a secret room and planned things together and called each other names that had nothing to do with their real names because they'd decided on each other in exactly this way. I know, Harry thought back. I know what this is. He filed that too. Not as a tactical asset. Just as itself. As something that mattered. The common room was warm and loud with the aftermath of the evening, everyone talking about the troll, the evening scare already in the process of becoming a story. Fred and George Weasley appeared immediately and demanded details from Ron with the energy of people who considered secondhand chaos a gift, and Ron provided them with embellishments that Harry noted were substantial but decided not to correct. Harry sat by the fire with his charms homework. The troll had not been enough of an event to make him forget he had charms homework, and worked through the equations, and listened to the common room settle around him, and kept one corner of his attention, always, on the thing he'd felt in Quirrell's classroom on the second Tuesday of term. Somewhere in the castle, something was being guarded and something was being hunted, and the gap between those two things was closing. Halloween had been a probe. A test of the defenses. And whoever was doing the testing was smart enough and desperate enough to risk a mountain troll, which meant the thing they wanted was worth a mountain troll. Harry put down his quill and looked at the fire. The Philosopher's Stone, he thought. He'd been turning it over since Hagrid's careful non-answer in Diagon Alley and the vault in Gringotts, and the specific date, the same day Harry had visited, someone had tried to rob Vault 713, and the vault had been empty because Hagrid had been there that morning, and Dumbledore had moved the stone to Hogwarts, and now the stone was here, in this building, and Voldemort, formless, desperate, afraid of death above everything, was looking for a way in. He thought about what he knew and what he didn't know and what he'd need to find out. He thought about the third-floor corridor and the locked door he'd seen on his second day, which smelled, now that he thought about it with the specific associations that Eren's memories had given him, of something animal and warm and enormous. He picked up his quill and went back to his charms homework. You're going to go down there eventually, Eren said. Yes, Harry thought. Not scared. Harry thought about a boy standing on a wall, looking at a world beyond it. About choosing to go toward the thing that was trying to get in rather than waiting for it to arrive. About the difference between defending a position and understanding what you're actually defending and why. No, he thought. But I'm going to know exactly what I'm walking into first. I owe it that much. He finished his charms homework and went to bed, and outside the tower windows Scotland was dark and enormous and the stars were out, and Hogwarts stood on its rock above the black water like something that had decided to stay, and inside it, 10-year-old, 11 now, as of July, Harry Potter slept without dreaming and woke up knowing exactly what the next step was. Chapter 4, The Language of Scouts. November came in hard. The wind off the lake had teeth in it by the first week, and the castle responded the way old stone always responds to cold, by becoming itself more completely, the corridors drafty and the fires more necessary and the whole building settling into its winter register, which was darker and more serious than its autumn one. Students moved between classes in tighter clusters. The Quidditch pitch became a place you had to want to be. Harry wanted to be there. He was on the pitch 4 mornings a week before breakfast, which Oliver would have arranged with the specific energy of someone who had been given exactly what he'd asked for and intended to use all of it. Wood was a decent captain in the way that people who genuinely love something are decent at organizing it, not always systematic, but always committed, and commitment was contagious. The rest of the Gryffindor team had opinions about their new seeker that evolved over 3 weeks from skepticism to cautious respect to something approaching awe, and Harry noted the evolution without drawing attention to it and focused on learning the pitch. He learned it the way he learned everything, completely, from first principles. Every air current. Every place where the wind off the lake interfered with the wind off the stands. The way the morning light hit the eastern hoops and the shadow the south tower threw across the pitch at 4 in the afternoon. He flew the pitch in every weather condition Wood's schedule allowed and several it didn't, because weather was information and you didn't get to choose your conditions in actual circumstances, so you'd better understand them in advance. The Nimbus responded to all of it. He and the broom had reached an understanding by the end of the second week that went beyond technique into something he found difficult to describe, a mutual familiarity, the way a good tool becomes an extension of intention rather than an object you operate. He stopped thinking about the broom while he flew, which was when the flying became real. Ron came to watch sometimes, early, before the rest of the castle was awake, sitting in the bottom row of the stands with a thermos of tea from the kitchens that he'd worked out how to access via a portrait on the 4th floor. He didn't talk during the flying, which Harry appreciated. He just watched, occasionally making a sound when Harry did something that registered even to a non-Quidditch player as remarkable, and afterward they walked back to the castle together and talked about other things, the comfortable way of people who don't need every shared space to be filled. "You fly like you're looking for something," Ron said one morning, walking back along the edge of the lake, their breath visible in the cold air. "I am," Harry said. In a match, the snitch is almost always in the highest thermal above the pitch center in the first 8 minutes, before the motion of the game disturbs the air enough to change its behavior. After that it drops to boundary level and moves against the wind. He paused. "So I'm looking for thermals." Ron was quiet for a moment. "Does Wood know that?" "Not yet." "Are you going to tell him?" "When it's useful," Harry said. "If I tell him now he'll build it into the strategy and Slytherin will notice the pattern and adjust for it. Better to use it once, decisively, when it matters most." Ron absorbed this, walking. "You think about Quidditch the way my dad thinks about Muggle electrical systems," he said. "Like it's a thing to understand, not just a thing to do." "Everything's a thing to understand," Harry said. "Yeah, but most people don't." Ron stopped. Considered. Started again. "My brothers just play. George says thinking about it too much makes you slow." "George is right for George," Harry said. "George's instincts are good enough that analysis would just be noise. Mine aren't that good yet. So I think instead." Ron looked at him sideways. "That might be the most honest thing I've ever heard anyone say about themselves." "It seemed accurate," Harry said. Ron laughed, the real one, the helpless variety that he couldn't quite stop when it started, and they walked back to the castle in the thin early light, and the day began. Hermione had been doing her own version of investigating. Harry had told her more, carefully, in portions, the way you brief someone when you need their intelligence but need to control for the panic that complete information might produce. He'd told her about Quirrell. Not everything, not yet, but enough, that something was wrong with the man, that it wasn't illness in the conventional sense, that whatever was wrong had a specific interest in a specific object currently somewhere below the 3rd floor. She had taken this with the methodical calm of someone who processes things through information gathering rather than emotion, and within 48 hours she had read everything the Hogwarts library had on possession, Horcruxes. She didn't find that word, but she came close enough that Harry had a very quiet, very important conversation with her about what she'd found and told her to stop looking in that particular direction for now, magical parasitism, and the recorded magical signatures of Dark Lords whose death had been uncertain. "The problem," Hermione said, "is that the existing literature treats this as a theoretical category. Nobody has actually documented a case of a Dark Lord surviving bodily death and maintaining functional will and intent. She paused. That we know of. We know of one, Harry said. We know of you, Hermione said, which was as close as she'd come to saying it directly, and Harry looked at her steadily until she looked away first and then looked back. Harry. The scar. It's not just a scar. No, Harry said. It's some fragment of him is in there. Something like that. She absorbed this. Around them the library was its usual afternoon self, 6th years with their heads in texts, a Ravenclaw 3rd year asleep on her arms, Madame Pants moving between shelves with the focused displeasure of someone maintaining order in a system that actively resisted it. Does that, Hermione stopped. Are you all right? I'm fine, Harry said. Not defensively. Just as a fact. The fragment. Does it do anything? To you? Harry looked at his homework. Not the way you mean, he said. It's not, it doesn't direct me. It's more like, he stopped, because what he was about to say was not what she'd asked and it was also accurate and he hadn't decided yet how much to say. There are things I understand about him because of it, he said finally. About Voldemort. About what he is and what he needs. That's useful. Hermione looked at him for a moment with her full attention, which was a great deal of attention. And the other thing, she said. The other thing in you. Because it's not just, I've been watching you for 2 months, Harry, and there is something else. Harry looked at her. You went completely still in Quirrell's class 3 weeks ago and when you came back from wherever you went you knew something you hadn't known before. Your reflexes are, not normal. You think about space and positioning in a way that, she stopped again. Organized herself. You don't have to tell me, she said, very precisely. I'm not asking you to. I just want you to know that I've noticed, and that whatever it is, I'm not frightened of it. This was, Harry thought, either the bravest or the most accurately calibrated thing anyone had said to him in his entire life. Possibly both. His name was Eren, Harry said. His name was Eren Jaeger and he lived and died in a world that isn't this one and what's left of him, the part of him that was most essentially what he was, ended up with me. In me. The night the Dursleys locked me in a cupboard without food or water and left for their holiday. Hermione was completely still. He understood something about captivity and freedom that I needed to understand, Harry said. And I understand things about patience and strategy and looking before you move that he needed, by the end. He paused. We're useful to each other. Is he, Hermione said carefully, aware? Right now? Yes, Harry said. Is he, listening to this? Harry almost smiled. He says you ask good questions. Hermione looked at the table. Then at the ceiling. Then at Harry with the expression of someone who has encountered something genuinely unprecedented and is in the process of deciding to be interested rather than destabilized. All right, she said. All right. Does he know anything about the stone? About what Voldemort is planning? He knows what I know, Harry said. We share information. His contribution is more, he thought about how to say it. Tactical. Experiential. He's seen how desperate, powerful things act when they're losing. When they're afraid. He knows the shape of it. And the shape of it here? Is that Voldemort is going to try again before Christmas, Harry said. Whatever is stopping him from getting to the stone, whoever set the protections, they're between him and what he wants and they don't know he's on the other side of them. That's an advantage for us but it won't last. He looked at her steadily. I want to know what the protections are before he gets through them. Hermione looked at him. You want to go down there? I want to know what's down there, Harry said. So when the time comes, and it will come, I'm not discovering things for the first time while someone's dying. She was quiet for a long moment, doing what she did, which was process. He waited. I'll help, she said. I know, Harry said. I've known since the troll. The first Quidditch match of the season was on the 12th of November, Gryffindor vs Slytherin, and the school treated it with the particular intensity of a community that has been building towards something for 3 months and needs a venue to put it. Harry came out onto the pitch with the rest of the team and felt the scale of the stands, full, all of them, every seat, the noise hitting him before the crowd itself resolved into individuals. He recognized the pressure of it, not anxiety, but the specific heightened clarity of circumstances where performance was required and witnessed, the same feeling that existed at the edge of every important decision. The Slytherin team came out. Flint, their captain, had a face that looked like it had been assembled under significant time pressure, and his team had the collective energy of people who had been told to win and had decided to interpret that instruction broadly. Harry looked at their seeker, Terence Higgs, 5th year, lean and fast, sitting on his broom with the professional patience of someone who had done this before. Wood gathered the team in a last-minute huddle. He talked about strategy with the focused passion he always brought, and Harry listened to the parts that were useful and filed the rest and looked at the sky, which was cold and grey and moving, the clouds doing things that would affect wind patterns over the center of the pitch by about the 12-minute mark. The whistle blew. The game opened the way Quidditch games opened, an explosion of motion, all of it simultaneously legible and overwhelming. Bludgers going, chasers crossing, keeper moving, Harry lifted out of it and went to his observational height, about 60 feet above the general action, and began his initial assessment. He found the snitch in 4 minutes. It was exactly where he'd predicted, highest thermal, pitch center, the golden glint of it moving in a slow exploratory arc about 80 feet above the game. He found it and kept flying and did not go after it because the pattern wasn't complete yet, and because Higgs hadn't found it, and because the moment you move you tell the other seeker where to look. He flew instead. He made Higgs look at him by going somewhere purposeful, dropping toward the eastern hoops with enough commitment to suggest he'd seen something, and watched Higgs react, and then pulled out of the dive and went somewhere else, and watched again. He was mapping Higgs the way he mapped everything. How fast the response was. Whether it was reactive or strategic. The caliber of opponent. Reactive, he concluded, after the third probe. Fast but reactive. Responds to movement rather than anticipating it. He went back to observing. At the 11-minute mark, a bludger went rogue, not the standard trajectory, not a clean approach, but a bludger that had been aimed and was following with a kind of focused intelligence that bludgers didn't normally display. Harry saw it when it was still 40 feet away. He had time to see that it was targeting him and not the abstract someone nearby variety of targeting but specific and maintained, and he had time to calculate that evasion was possible and that evasion in the standard way, straight up, hard banking turn, would put him in a position relative to Higgs that would be tactically disadvantageous. He didn't evade straight up. He dropped, full dive, straight down, the bludger following, the stands coming up very fast, and at the last possible moment, 15 feet, 10, close enough to see individual faces in the front row, he pulled sideways in a flat banking turn that barely cleared the top of the stands and the bludger smashed into the wooden barrier of the stand itself hard enough to leave a crater. He came out of the turn already climbing, already back to altitude, and found the snitch with his eyes in the next 3 seconds because it had moved exactly where he'd predicted it would move after 9 minutes. He was gone before Higgs processed what had just happened. The catch was clean. Both hands, controlled deceleration, the snitch flexing its wings against his closed fingers, he held it up and the whistle went and the Gryffindor stand erupted in a way that the cold November air carried for what felt like a very long distance. He came down to the pitch and his teammates were there and Wood was making a sound that was too emotional for a third year but that Harry found entirely appropriate to the situation. Someone clapped him hard on the back, probably Fred, the force was diagnostic, and Ron was in the front row of the stands with both arms in the air in the unself-conscious way of someone for whom joy was a full-body experience. Harry looked at the snitch in his hand for a moment. Then he looked at the Slytherin end of the pitch. Flint was talking to his team with the energy of someone distributing blame rather than analyzing outcome. Higgs was watching Harry with the clear-eyed respect of someone who knows they've been beaten by something they need to understand before the next encounter. Harry met his eyes. Nodded, once. Higgs nodded back. That, Harry thought, was the correct response. The aftermath of the match carried through dinner and into the evening, the common room full and loud and warm, Fred and George narrating the bludger incident to anyone who'd listen, and everyone listened, with increasingly dramatic embellishments. Harry sat by the fire with Hermione and worked, because there was still work to do and the match had been good, but it had also cost an afternoon he'd intended to use for research. Snape, Hermione said quietly, during a pause. Harry looked up. He was muttering during the match. I was watching him from the stands. She kept her voice low, her book open in her lap at a page she hadn't actually been reading. When it went after you. He was making eye contact with it. With the bludger. She paused. His lips were moving. It looked like an incantation. Harry processed this. Countercharm, he said, after a moment. Hermione blinked. Sorry. He was counteracting something. If someone had put an incantation on the bludger to make it target me specifically, breaking that takes focus and eye contact, and yes, it looks like the person doing it is the one who said it. He paused. Who else were you watching? Hermione had the expression of someone rapidly revising a conclusion. Quirrell, she said. I wasn't watching Quirrell. She closed her eyes briefly. He was behind me. I couldn't have seen. It's fine, Harry said. It confirms the direction of it. Not Snape. He went back to his notes. He was trying to help. Snape was trying to help you. I think he feels obligated to, Harry said, which was all he was going to say about that, because the shape of what sat under Snape's complicated dislike was starting to clarify in ways that felt private, like overhearing a conversation not meant for him. Don't mention it to him. He won't appreciate knowing we know. Hermione looked at him. You're very careful about what you say to which person. Information is a resource, Harry said. You don't spend it without thinking about what you're getting back. Eren taught you that? Eren confirmed it, Harry said. I think I knew it before. He went to the 3rd floor on a Thursday night in late November, alone, because what he was doing was reconnaissance, and reconnaissance was most effectively done by one person who could move quietly rather than 3 people who could move at different speeds with different noise profiles. He'd told Hermione and Ron he was going. He'd told them separately, and he'd told them clearly, and he'd told them he was going alone and why, and neither of them had loved it, but both of them had accepted it because he'd explained his reasoning, and his reasoning was sound. The castle at night was its own place. The daytime population of students and professors and institutional purpose had withdrawn, and what was left was the building itself, old, layered, full of things that moved and things that breathed and things that had decided the castle was theirs between certain hours. Harry moved through it the way Eren moved through contested terrain in the memories, without hurry, with awareness distributed wide, making decisions one step ahead rather than one step behind. The 3rd floor corridor was locked. The lock was a standard one, not warded beyond the castle's general security architecture, and Harry had read enough of a history of magic and enough of Hogwarts, a history, Hermione had recommended it in her first week and she'd been right, to understand the general structure of that architecture. He'd also spent 2 weeks paying specific attention to how the locked doors in the building differed from each other, which differences were significant and which were cosmetic. This lock was significant. Beyond it, the air smelled of something warm and animal and large. He opened the door with Alohomra, first-year charms, but correctly performed, with the precise intent and wand movement that Flitwick had been drilling since October, and went in. The dog was real, was the first thing. Not a statue, not an illusion, not a magical construct, a real animal, 3 real heads, each of which came awake at the sound of the door and turned toward him with the specific attention of something that has been given one job and is very committed to doing it. The Cerberus was enormous in the way things that exist outside normal scale are enormous, filling most of the room, each head the size of a small cart, 6 eyes yellow and bright and fixed on Harry with the assessment of a predator deciding whether what has entered its territory is threat or prey. Harry stood still. He stood completely still, the way you stand when something that can move faster than you has its attention fixed on you, and the worst thing you can do is trigger the response pattern that stillness is currently interrupting. He stood still and he looked back, and he let the thing behind his sternum, the part of him that had looked at titans, at things vast and terrible and ancient, and had not looked away, he let that part look at the three-headed dog. The nearest head lowered, slowly, the growl in it shifting in register. Still warning. But the attack hadn't come. Harry looked at the floor. There was a trapdoor. Large, iron-ringed, set into the stone floor almost directly under the dog's feet. He noted its position, its hardware, the gap between it and the nearest wall. He looked at the dog's feet. At the rhythm of breathing across three heads, which was slightly mismatched, not synchronized completely, each head doing its own version of the breathing cycle, which meant the three heads were not a single consciousness. They were more like three dogs in one body. Different heads, different temperaments, different points of focus. The rightmost head was still growling. The leftmost had dropped its nose toward the floor, scenting. The center head, the largest, was watching Harry's hands. Harry put his wand away. Slowly, visibly, 2 fingers and a deliberate movement that the center head tracked precisely. He put his wand in his pocket and showed both empty hands, palms up. The growl dropped. Didn't stop, but dropped. Harry looked at the trapdoor. Looked at the dog. Made his count, the size of the trapdoor, the angle, the massive animal above it. He looked at the bottom of the center head's paw and saw, under the claws, the edge of something he'd have missed if he hadn't been looking. It was a recorder. A small wooden instrument, the kind sold in children's toy shops, sitting under the Cerberus's paw like something placed there deliberately and then forgotten. He filed this immediately and thoroughly. Music. Whatever was below the trapdoor, whatever came next in the sequence of protections, the key to getting past the dog itself was music. He looked at the three heads. The leftmost head had stopped scenting and was looking at him now, but differently than the other two, with a drowsier quality, and he realized the leftmost head was fighting sleep in the specific way of something that has been trained to a stimulus, and the stimulus is present. The recorder under the paw. The dog had been put to sleep while someone, Hagrid, probably, checking on it, had played, and when they'd left the instrument. He had what he needed. He backed out of the room at the same deliberate pace he'd entered, maintaining eye contact with the center head until he was through the doorway, and then he eased the door closed behind him and stood in the corridor and breathed. 3 heads, Eren noted. 3 heads, Harry confirmed. And you just stood there. Motion triggers the attack response, Harry said. Stillness triggers the assessment response. If I was going to be assessed, I wanted to control the duration of it. You didn't bring the flute. I didn't know I'd need one. Now I do. Harry started walking back down the corridor. I know what's at the top of the sequence. Now I need to know what's below it. Research, Eren said, with something that was almost amusement. Research, Harry agreed. He was back in the Gryffindor common room by 11, sitting by the fire with a piece of parchment, writing down exactly what he'd seen in the order he'd seen it, with notes on what each observation implied and what question it opened. It was, he thought, exactly what the Survey Corps used to do, after a mission, before the information could soften into memory, write down what was real. What you'd seen with your eyes and what you'd concluded from it, and keeping those two categories carefully separate, because the conclusions could be wrong but what you'd seen was just what you'd seen. When he was done he folded the parchment and put it inside the cover of his charms textbook and went to bed, and slept without dreams, and woke up knowing he needed to find a recorder. Ron found him a recorder 3 days later, the casual way Ron solved practical problems, by knowing someone who had one and asking for it without making it a significant event. It was a basic wooden instrument belonging to a second-year Hufflepuff who played it in his dormitory and had been told by his roommates in no uncertain terms to stop, and he was delighted to lend it to a friendly Gryffindor in exchange for help with a transfiguration essay. Harry spent 2 evenings learning 3 tunes. He had no musical background and no particular aptitude for it, but aptitude was mostly practice at speed, and he applied himself to this the way he applied himself to everything that needed doing, completely, without sentiment, until it was done. By the third evening he could produce a consistent enough version of a slow, repetitive melody that the purpose would be served. He told Ron and Hermione over breakfast on a Saturday. "The dog can be put to sleep with music," he said, between bites of toast. "There's a trapdoor underneath it. Whatever's guarding the stone, it's in layers, the dog is the first one. I need to know what comes after." Ron had stopped eating. He was looking at Harry with the expression that meant he was calibrating. "You went down there alone. At night." "Reconnaissance," Harry said. "One person is more useful than three for that." "You could have been eaten," Ron said. "I wasn't," Harry said. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. "Right. What's the next one?" "That's what I need to find out," Harry said. "The protections were set by specific professors. I can work out who set what if I know enough about what each of them would think to use." He looked at them both. "I need you two to help me with that. Think about each professor's specialty. What they'd choose if they were asked to set one obstacle in a sequence." Hermione was already ahead of this. Flitwick would use charms. Some kind of enchanted object, probably, a puzzle or a barrier that requires a specific spell. She paused. Sprout would use a plant. Devil's Snare is the obvious choice, darkness-loving, constricting, specific light-based counter-cursing required. It's the right level of difficulty for what they'd want. Snape, Ron said, slowly. Potions. A logic puzzle. He'd use a logic puzzle because he thinks most people, most wizards, can't think clearly under pressure. He said this with the specific confidence of someone who had observed Snape for 3 months and understood what the man valued. Harry looked at Ron with something like appreciation. "That's exactly right," he said. Ron looked slightly startled by the directness of this. Then pleased. "Well. He's not subtle about it." "What about Quirrell?" Hermione said. Harry was quiet for a moment. "Quirrell's protection is the stone itself," he said. "Or the obstacle immediately before it. Whatever he chose, it'll be something he thought would stop someone like him. Which means it'll look difficult but have a specific weakness he'd know to exploit." He paused. "Which means it won't stop me." They sat with that for a moment, the breakfast hall loud around them and the morning light coming through the high windows in long cold angles. "Harry," Hermione said. "When you say it won't stop you," she stopped. Started more carefully. "You're not planning to go down there alone when it matters. When Voldemort actually tries." "No," Harry said. "When it matters I want you both there." Ron blinked. "Us? You're both better than you think," Harry said, which was not a reassurance or a comfort, but simply what he'd observed. "Hermione, you'll get through the logic puzzle in 60 seconds. Ron, you play chess." Yes, but what does chess?" "There's going to be a chess set," Harry said. "A large one." He looked at Ron with the specific clarity of someone stating a fact they're entirely certain of. "You're going to be very important." Ron looked at his hands. Then at Harry. His expression was complex, the beginning of something, the way a landscape changes when the light shifts, everything the same but readable differently. "Right," he said, with the simplicity of someone who has decided. "Right, then." December arrived and with it the specific atmosphere of a castle full of children approaching Christmas, which was partly excitement and partly relief at the prospect of going home and partly, for some of them, the complicated feelings of people for whom home was a negotiation rather than a comfort. Harry was staying at Hogwarts for the holidays. He'd told McGonagall in October with the straightforward manner he used for most administrative matters, and she'd noted it with a look that wanted to ask more and didn't, and he'd been grateful for her professionalism. He wasn't staying because he had nowhere else to go, that was still technically true but had ceased to feel like a wound, he was staying because something was going to happen before Christmas or just after it and he intended to be present for it. The common room thinned out over the last week of term. People left in groups, dragging trunks, waving from the doorway with the specific energy of people for whom the castle was a temporary arrangement and home was the destination. By Christmas Eve the Gryffindor common room had Harry, a few older students, the Weasley twins, who had elected to stay on the grounds that home was, in Fred's words, operationally limited for certain ongoing projects, and Percy, who stayed every year and whose reasons were his own. Ron stayed. Harry hadn't asked him to. Ron had told him, 2 weeks before the end of term, that he was staying, and when Harry pointed out that he could go home, Ron said he knew he could and he was choosing not to, and that was the entirety of the conversation. On Christmas morning Harry found a pile of gifts at the foot of his bed, which he hadn't expected. He went through them with the methodical attention he gave to unexpected things. Sweets from Ron, a book from Hermione, Advanced Magical Theory, 3rd year level, with a note that said you'd be bored by the standard text and this one has a section on soul theory that you might find relevant, a hand-knitted jumper from Mrs. Weasley, which was dark green with a large gold H worked into the front in a style that was both enthusiastic and entirely sincere. He put the jumper on immediately. It was warm in the way of something made by a person rather than a machine, the specific warmth of actual care expressed through labor, and he sat on his bed in it and held the book Hermione had sent and read her note 3 times. Soul Theory. He opened the book to the index, found the relevant section, and read. The section was 12 pages long and academically phrased but the contents were, for someone with Harry's particular situation, remarkable. It described the theoretical mechanism by which magical will, specifically, will of unusual magnitude, will so concentrated and absolute that it exceeded the normal capacity of a human soul to contain, could leave a residue after death. Could attach itself, in pieces, to living hosts. Could persist. It described, in careful theoretical language, something that had a strong functional resemblance to what Harry had been living with since August. He sat with the book in his lap for a long time. You knew this was possible, he said, to the quiet of the dormitory, to the morning light coming cold through the tower windows. No, Eren said. I didn't know anything. I died. What happened after, that wasn't a plan. It was just, what I was didn't have anywhere to go that wasn't somewhere. And you ended up here. I ended up here. Harry looked at the jumper on his chest, the H in gold, Mrs. Weasley's handiwork, the most straightforwardly kind thing anyone had put on him in 11 years. He looked at it and thought about captivity and freedom and the things that persisted after everything else stopped. Are you glad? He asked. The pause was long. Long enough that snow began falling outside the window, soft and certain, the way Scottish winter snow fell when it had decided to commit. Yes, Eren said. I'm glad. Harry nodded. Put the book aside. Got up, went downstairs, where Ron was already awake and the twins were doing something inadvisable with filibuster fireworks in the corner of the common room and Percy was telling them with declining conviction to stop, and Harry sat next to Ron in his green jumper and accepted a chocolate from the box Fred offered and felt, not despite everything, not in spite of the Dursleys and the cupboard and the thing in the turban and the stone and all of it, but simply and concurrently with all of it. Completely, uncomplicated present. Good, Harry thought. That was good. He found the mirror of Eriste on his second night of wandering the empty castle, which was something the invisibility cloak made possible. The cloak had appeared in his Christmas pile in an unsigned package with a note that said only your father's, use it well, and he'd looked at it for a long moment before putting it on, feeling the quality of what it was, the specific impulse more actions write the next chapter now. AI chat 5-hour limit reached. More actions write the next chapter now. AI chat 5-hour limit reached. More actions Claude Sonnet 4.